It is Sunday, the 16th of the 11th, 2025. The time is 10:30, and that means, as always, one thing, that there are a multitude of F1-centric threads at which we need to pull. We are back again, just like Hack. And then we've got to talk about Permane Racing Bull stability settings. That's why they haven't announced their driver pairing for next year. Methinks not. Daniel Kvyat come out and he's had some things to say, talking about the perfect driver and who he would pull X, Y and Z traits from. We'll talk about Las Vegas timetable. So too, we'll talk about the dilemma that is being presented to Oscar Piastri, if indeed he harbours aspirations of winning himself a championship of the drivers' variety. We'll talk about Ralf Schumacher and Lewis Hamilton. So too, Jacques Villeneuve has chimed in, talking about Scuderia Ferrari's driver pairing conundrum. Mohammed Ben Sulayem will run unopposed next year. We'll talk about that too. And we'll talk about Damon and Johnny. They chimed in on Max Verstappen's performance over the last race weekend, or the last couple race weekends at least. So too, they talked about driver guidelines on who's to blame for the melee that broke out at the Brazil Grand Prix Turn 1 between the one that they call Oscar Piastri, so too Antonelli and Charles Leclerc, and they both chimed in on the chaos that ensues over at Scuderia Ferrari. The Fiorano and Maranello boys and girls are struggling, are they not? Have been struggling for as near as makes no difference now, 20 years. How to solve for it? Stephen, you're a legend. Gino, Darius, what's going on? Go on and let's get into this. There is not a millisecond that we have to waste. Here's your timings, and again, this is all UK time at Las Vegas. You can pause this and dial it in. This is going to be important. Let's talk about Oscar Piastri, because he said some things over the past couple of race weekends. I think this is important, chat. Of course, Oscar Piastri, 24 points now adrift of Lando Norris, his teammate. Why? Well, some say that his form's not been very good. Some say that Oscar Piastri is an enhorabuena type driver. When his form's perfect, when everything's going fine, his returns, therefore, are swimming like chaotic. One of the best drivers that potentially we've ever seen when all is good, all is quiet on the west of. However, when things are bad, some say that he lacks the ability or the resilience to turn things around. Oscar Piastri, over the past couple of race weekends, has been giving interview after interview, almost ad nauseum. First, he was on the Beyond the Grid podcast saying that everything's okay. Blink twice, driver 81. If you need backup, if you need some help, sir. And then he went on another interview with Lawrence Pareto, and in that he said some things. Everything's okay. That Lando Norris, the relationship between him and Lando has never been better. Play the clip, Cameron.
Create tension, but it...
Finally, he relents. Oscar Piastri goes back through.
It obviously has the potential to create tension, but it honestly hasn't. I think our relationship is the same as it's always been. I think we just know each other better now.
The man from Melbourne is on his way to a maiden Grand Prix victory.
And it has been superb.
Yeah, obviously there was some complications in the race. Everyone is on the grid because they want to fight for wins and win races.
Oscar Piastri.
Complications, sir. I just feel like Oscar Piastri is giving us the exam answers to the exam questions, that he's not shooting straight, because he's got this, there is PR boxes, McLaren-shaped PR boxes that he needs to tick, and I think that's a shame. If Oscar Piastri loses this championship of the drivers' variety, bet your bottom dollar that Mark Webber et al. Will have some things to say. Oh, and by the way, if we're talking about Oscar Piastri, people are chiming in, talking about his lack of speed. Juan Pablo Montoya had this to say: the problem isn't all of the papaya rules, nor is it favouritism. It's not Zach Brown nor Andrea Stella. The problem around Oscar Piastri, says Juan Pablo Montoya, is that he has no speed. When he ended up being second after the incident with Kimi Antonelli and Charles Leclerc in Brazil, Norris was able to get away from him. Norris has had 7 or 8 seconds on Piastri. What's the excuse? In Mexico it was low grip, in Brazil it was bumpy. Las Vegas won't be a strong track for McLaren because of the low downforce. They won't have a huge advantage, and the other cars will make their lives difficult. I expect the Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull to be strong in Vegas, so if Piastri has an average race, he can lose anywhere between 10 and 15 points. Why don't you tell us how you really feel, Juan Pablo Montoya? But he's on to something here, isn't he? There's causation, there's reasons why, as far as OJP's drop in form. The trend is your friend until there is a bend, some say. And how has there been a bend of late for Oscar Piastri? In the first 9 races, he was gangbusters, 4 poles, 5 race wins. Since then, it's been like 1 pole and 2. He's been nowhere. And especially over the past 4 races, no podiums to see. And again, the difference between the good and the great F1 peddlers is the ability to do their best in the peakiest of moments, the most important points. Of course, you've got to extend Oscar Jack Piastri some grace. It's only his 3rd season at Lando Norris 2.0 teams now. He's been nailing it, hasn't he, Lando? And that's where it gets trickier than taking things. Oh, and by the way, Christian Horner has showed up to New York, which raises questions about his next move. Are we going to see him pop up at Alpine? What's he doing over in New York? Is he visiting investors with a view to leverage financiers to achieve his goal, his bucket list item in F1? That is to be a shareholder. A Christian Horner, come now, Toto the boy who cried wolf, no longer just a team principal and or CEO, now a shareholder, a strategic decision maker. There's pictures surfacing of Christian Horner bubbling around New York. The rumour is that he's been in the Middle East of late as well. Where's he going to pop up? Alpine, Aston Martin, who the fudge knows? Now, let me tell you about this, because this is going to, in fact, let me show you this first. Maximilian Verstappen talking about go-karting and his genesis story into Formula One. We played it last time. Sound. We'll play it this time with audio. Roll the clip.
It's always, I find very important when you're a child that your parents, they don't force you to do something.
Yeah.
So my dad, my mom, they never told me like, hey, try a go-kart, or like you need to do this. Yeah, I was actually like at a go-kart track, and I saw a younger kid. I was 4, and I saw a 3-year-old kid already drive a go-kart, and I was like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
He's 3 years old, and I'm not driving yet. And then I called my dad. He was racing, I think Montreal, F1, and he was like, no, I want you to wait until you're 6, like not now. And so then I kept pushing, crying to my mom for like a couple months that I wanted to start, like get me in the go-kart. Finally, they allowed me. So it's like 4.5, and I started to drive. And basically, the kid that I saw at the time that basically kick-started it for me, he's to this day my best friend.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Good story. Don't hate it. Has there ever been a driver not named Maximilian Verstappen more suited to Formula One by dint of the extent of their nature and nurture? 2 drivers who could, 2 parents even, who could have both been F1 drivers given the opportunity. Jos ultimately made it, Sophie didn't due to the lack of opportunity. And then as far as nurture, as far as the dude's ability to practice and achieve his 10,000 hours, Maximilian Verstappen, if not in a car, will be in the sim. You know this because Laura Mecki has told us this on the Talking Ball podcast. Oh, and by the way, Damon Hill and Johnny Herbert on their podcast had some things to say about Max Verstappen. Hitherto never too kind about Max, never very effusive in their praise. However, it feels like both of them have now rounded third. Monday morning quarterback settings. Hindsight is always 2020. Of Max Verstappen's performance at the Brazilian Grand Prix, Damon Hill said that it was Senna-esque. Oh, the humanity. We've been expecting you for some time, Damon and Johnny. Welcome. Put your feet up, chaps. Get yourself a beverage. Mi casa es su casa. It feels like this is an inflection point of a season as far as Max Verstappen and the credit that he's garnering from the F1 Emirati, being Damon, being Johnny Herbert, being Nico Rosberg, talking about him trackside, his ability, God-tier ability to manipulate the car in and on and around the limits of adhesion. This is different for Max, and I don't hate it. However, Daniel Kvyat, Max Verstappen's old friend, has not been as effusive in his praise of Max Verstappen. Asked at one of the latest AI motorsport events if again you were going to pull different facets from drivers to make the perfect driver, which one from who, Daniel Kvyat had this to say.
Qualifying Ayrton Senna.
Overtaking.
Overtaking Fernando Alonso.
Defending.
Also Fernando.
Ability in the wet.
Well, let's say Senna again.
Car setup.
Alan Prost.
Finally, mentality.
I don't know, myself.
Perfect.
Oh, the humanity. Completely fair and objective, of course, Daniel Kvyat. Not like he's got a dog in this fight or anything. And Daniel Kvyat isn't the first one to undergo these circumstances. Lest we forget that Michael Schumacher and Heinz-Harald Frentzen also were Eskimo brothers. Eskimo brothers probably isn't the classiest term, but that Michael Schumacher fancied himself some of Heinz-Harald Frentzen's misses, and in the end took her from him. And by the way, lest we get too techier than techie things, I need to show you this AI event. I don't know what to make of it. Chaos. There was an event recently in the Middle East, I want to say Bahrain, and AI cars were going around. Daniel Kvyat was involved, and it looks something like this. Well, let's watch it and then you tell me what you think. Roll the clip. I mean, how do we? Yeah, of course. What are we doing? What are we doing? I want to love this. I want to be enthusiastic. What I don't want to be is the Kodak to iPhone. I understand that we are living in the age of AI, so too Netflix and Drive to Survive Asian. But this feels like it might be a bit much, ladies and gentlemen of the F1 jury. Not a big fan of Formula E. And this just looks like Formula E on steroids without drivers. I mean, maybe it catches on in the end, but I feel like as at the time of writing, November of 2025, it might be a bit too soon. Oh, and by the way, Charles Leclerc has dropped merch and it doesn't look too bad, eh? Fair play. Almost merch to commemorate he's getting engaged with his missus, and I don't hate that from Charles Leclerc. But what I do hate is the state of play at Scuderia Ferrari. The red car with the yellow badge and the black prancing coursers on top has become a joke, ladies and gentlemen of the F1 jury. I do not like it. There's a couple of things being said. Jacques Villeneuve chiming in on Charles Leclerc, saying, you know what, he hasn't always had the car, and that of course is Ferrari's culpability. However, if he's going to move across to another team, there will be questions asked. Is he a championship level driver? Well, the true answer to that exam question is that we do not know. It's impossible to normalise holistically and accurately for his lack of car and the lack of operational infrastructure at Scuderia Ferrari. So the headlines will always precede him. That ultimately Charles Leclerc cannot be a championship level driver because he hasn't been there, he hasn't done it, and therein lies the issue. Jacques Villeneuve says Ferrari is the home of Charles Leclerc. He has been racing there since 2019 and practically the entire course of the proprietary categories that the feeder formula he has done as a Ferrari junior driver. He has yet to prove that he can win a championship. He has proven to be fast, but he has yet to prove that he can win championships. Maybe he didn't have the car to do it, continues Jacques Villeneuve. Quote, but in the eyes of other teams, there will always be this question mark. And over the years, the other teams have gradually decided to bet on other drivers. I think that 2 to 3 years ago, Charles Leclerc had more market than he does now. The extent of the Scuderia Ferrari sabotage is levels, chat, I'm telling you. And now Ralf Schumacher chimes in. And again, the context is as follows. John Elkann, you will be aware, came out and said some things the other day, blaming the drivers, saying that they need to talk less and drive more. What are we doing, John Elkann? Why don't you have Frederick Vasseur, your charge, the fellow whose contract you've just extended, build himself a car? How about that? 70-30, that's the culpability. That's always going to be as a proportion of the whole, how you drive and have success in the Drivers' Championship, and so too Constructors. You should know this because you built yourself a God tier car only last year. In the dying embers of 2024, you had the quickest car, but then you went and changed 99% of it because you are God tier F1 minds. What are we doing here? Ralf Schumacher's coming in. He's talked about Lewis Hamilton, as are so many different people now. Ollie Behrman will replace him. Lewis Hamilton isn't worth the money. Father Time is undefeated, undisputed. Lewis is about to turn 40, 41 now next year, and that means that he gets techier than techie things. Can you expect Lewis Hamilton's performance to improve? Well, it depends on whether they build a car next year, whether they listen to Lewis about his advice about working culture and what it looks like. That the way they set up the car in Canada was nonsense. It made no sense. Well, Ralf Schumacher has chimed in and he's talked about the sliding doors that are the careers of Ollie Behrman and Sir Lewis Hamilton. Ralf Schumacher continues, quote, Ferrari, as far as Ferrari are concerned, I would take Behrman instead of Hamilton. He's doing wonders and he costs less. Oh, the humanity. Now, Lewis Hamilton costs $70 million a year. Some reports confirm Ollie Behrman would cost substantially less than that in an inflationary era. In times when interest rates are doing one of these, in times when Ferrari have forecasted 9.8 billion and revised that down to 9.0 billion euros in 2030, the automotive industry is on its knees. Therefore, the irony is not lost on me that when Lewis Hamilton was initially announced that Ferrari's share price did one of these. Since then, however, inversion, mean reversion, it's done one of these, ladies and gentlemen. They've lost billions of market capitalization, not just at the altar of poor performance on track, but poor sales. Can they, therefore, as my principal supposition, afford to pay Lewis Hamilton, an underperforming Lewis Hamilton, over the next couple of years? Well, people are now conjecturing and speculating that Lewis Hamilton may or may not get Danny Ricciardo, the same treatment, the same thing that happened to Danny, that he got jettisoned in the midst of his underperformance. Due to his underperformance will happen to Sir Lewis Hamilton. That's what the word on the F1 curb is saying. And here's what's upsetting me even more, chat. As a Sir Lewis Hamilton fan, we spoke about this coming into the season, that it was always going to be difficult. The steep up which Sir Lewis Hamilton would have to climb and overcome was always going to be super steep, almost perpendicular to ground zero. Unprecedented circumstances. The last driver to win a race, even at 40 years old, was Nigel Mansell, and that's as near as makes no difference. 30 years ago, what are we doing? 1993 or 4. It's a long time ago, and I say all that to say this: F1 is a young man's game, is now more than it ever has been as at the time of writing. So what do you expect for Sir Lewis Hamilton to do? Do you think this is all of a sudden going to get better? Heroes only exist in novels and fairy tales. Don't expect for Lewis Hamilton of 2018 to turn back up. But here's what I said at the start of the season, that at some point people are going to start to do to Lewis Hamilton in their red overalls with a yellow badge and black prancing corset top, what they did to Ayrton Senna in 1994 with the Rotherham's Williams racing overalls on. There is something happening now in real time where people are almost trying to memorialise Sir Lewis Hamilton. There have been a ton of tweets over the past 24 hours celebrating his 5th championship achieved at Turkey 5 years ago now. This is happening. These things are starting to turn up. I keep seeing all of these things to your right hand side where Mercedes are talking about how things used to be. So too these ones. People memorialising Lewis Hamilton as if he's not even in F1 anymore. And I don't like it, chat. It's always going to happen. But if you want a symptom, if you want any greater, more accurate portrayal of where Lewis Hamilton is as at the time of writing, then it is this. I don't even want to see Lewis Hamilton in the red overalls no more. I'll be honest with you. I want to remember Lewis Hamilton in the black overalls represented by the boys and girls from Brackley and Brixworth. Those were the glory years. 2018 Singapore, do you know what I mean? 2014 his second championship. That's what I remember Sir Lewis Hamilton as, and that's what's happening in real time. Nobody cares to see Lewis Hamilton in the Ferrari because it reminds them of bad times. Oh, and by the way, Johnny Herbert and Damon Hill have come out. They're doing a podcast and it's good. Keep it on the straight. Straight Talking. I can't remember the name of the podcast, but it doesn't matter. In there, they've said some good stuff. Now, I know you guys don't necessarily love or like Damon Hill and Johnny Herbert, that it's biased each and every single time. God tier, Andy. This is when... Oh, Andy, don't even do it to me, chap. It's nostalgia, isn't it? Age is like fine wine whiskey and only gets better with age, like Sir Lewis. I mean, that sounds nice on paper, Randy. And you're right. You're batting 1,000 there, sir. But in the context of Formula One, Father Time is undefeated, undisputed, pound for pound, has never lost around Ian. How's the fleet? Oh, mate, I'm still with it. I'm still with it, but we're battling. Do you know what I mean? We move on. We go strong. And make no excuses. Yeah, the robots are taking over. Stephen, I don't know what we're looking at with that AI. It just makes no sense. Lions are from Africa, says Stephen. This is true. I still have hopes of Lewis in red despite their misgivings. I don't know. Hope springs internal. People say that faith is the belief in something, sans evidence, and I think that's what we're dealing with here. I cannot be an abbot of unreason. I prefer to remember Lewis in them, their black overalls, better times. Oh, and by the way, speaking of Johnny Herbert and Damon Hill have done a podcast, and on it, they've talked about some things in particular. I'm going to read them out to you because it's techie things. In the first instance, we've talked about the Senna-esque reference to Max Verstappen's performance over at the Brazilian Grand Prix last race weekend. And that's props to them, finally recognising Maximilian Verstappen overcoming their perceived British bias. In the second instance, they had a big row about guidelines, that driving guidelines are for the birds. Nonsense. What are these driver guidelines about? Johnny Herbert says something to this effect, that it's the drivers that are so keen to institute for these driver guidelines, but F1 would be better without them. Freer, the drivers more capable of racing. The driver guidelines are suffocating. They're just a necktie. Nobody bloody wants them. Why don't we just use common sense like we used to back in the day? Inside the line privilege. Tick. Did you leave enough racing room? Tick. Cheeky over-aggressive manoeuvre. Tick. Why don't we just use our common sense? Johnny Herbert says, get rid of the driver guidelines. Damon Hill tells an interesting story where he says initially when Jean Todt recruited him to be a driver steward, the driver stewards were only meant to be there as counsels, sideline consultants. They weren't meant to be driving the decision because there were schemes of delegation. There's a delineation in terms of responsibility between driver stewards and the proper stewards. All of a sudden, when Mohammed Ben Salem, who, by the way, will run opposed for the presidential elections in December of this year, when MBS came in, he said, you know what, why don't we just have driver stewards proper? Don't delineate between schemes and remits. Just have driver stewards and stewards. I was like, well, of course. God tier levels of governance, as always, from MBS. Oh, and by the way, tell some stories about Ferrari. They go super deep on Ferrari. Here's Damon Hill telling a brilliant Niki Lauda story, and I will link this podcast, the full episode, in the description. Roll the clip.
Yeah. When he first went there and first drove for Ferrari, and Niki, in his pithy way, said, the car is, can I say the word? The car is shit. Anyway, the car is shit. And so the guy now has the job of translating to Enzo
Get that.
the feedback. And goes and tells Enzo. And then Enzo tells him a question for Niki. So he goes back to Niki and says, Il commendatore, he's asking, how shit? Which is the story I heard.
Very good. Very right, of course, line.
Very good, but he's alluding to something more heinous and serious, right? Pertinent as far as Ferrari are concerned. There is this politicking over which both Charles and Lewis need to overcome. That you want to be able to feed back, but in a way that still manages the stakeholder and expectations of the senior stakeholders at Ferrari. Because if you come out and say, like Lewis did, that once upon a time it was a dream, and now it is a nightmare, then there's going to be problems. Then you're going to get Alcon saying, well, the WEC team, it's unity over there. That shows you that our mechanics, there's nothing wrong with them, that they can nail it. It is our drivers, said John Elkann, that need to speak less and drive more. I mean, bloody no, John Elkann. Whatever happened to leadership from the front, sir, by example, sir, that is not it. And to that point, Hill and Johnny Herbert expound. Roll the clip.
For being outspoken about? No, it's not. The problem is it's back at the factory, unfortunately, where the engineers haven't been able to produce the goods.
The mechanics
for the drivers
were great.
Yes,
he said they're winning world championships, so the mechanics are
they're
okay,
but the drivers not. But they're not the ones who designed the car, I don't believe.
No,
so no, exactly. So
well, who does design it?
Huh? They're the ones that I think we could have done a better job in many respects. Well, that was a bit harsh. But it's the team around the drivers that haven't been able to produce the car that the drivers need. If the drivers had the car, they wouldn't be commenting in that way.
Isn't that Fred Vasseur's job then to get the performance? So why did he not?
Yeah, well, there you go.
Mention Fred.
Precisely that, yeah.
Anyway, listen.
For being outspoken about? No, it's not.
Isn't it Frederick Vasseur, Damon says, that's ultimately responsible for designing a car? Doesn't the buck rest with him when all is said and done for nailing himself and themselves an SF25, which they didn't do? So then why did they even extend Frederick Vasseur? Do you know what I mean? If he hasn't been delivering results, point your lens therefore, John Elkann, at him, your guy. How very dare you talk about the drivers who have been patience manifest ad nauseum throughout the 2025 season. This is nonsense. Absolute chaos. How very dare John Elkann point the lens. I understand his rationale. Well, if the WEC team can win, then why can't the F1 team, where the only difference there is that there's disharmony over in Fiorano and Maranello as far as the F1 team are concerned? Well, not quite, John Elkann, because the communication's been bad. Brian Bosey and Riccardo Adami give too little information, and in the very next sentence give far too much. Looks poor. Looks, it smacks of Shakespearean tragedy, false seeming even. Over there at Ferrari, they've done nothing. Lewis Hamilton demanded only a couple of things: rigidity as far as the rear is concerned, a bit of time to acclimatise to the Brembo brakes. So too needs himself a stable car that he can maintain a high minimum speed for the medium and high speed turn. The confidence enough to do it. You've delivered none of those, John Elkann, and you want to talk about the drivers. How very dare you. F1 flotsam and jetsam, but 1000%, and they've been that way for the longest time, and it's not good enough. Driver 61 put up, and this is the irony's not lost on me. It would be remiss of me not to mention this. Driver 61 put up a video yesterday where he's talked about Scuderia Ferrari, the glory days 2000 to 2004, when they couldn't lose a race. It was Michael Schumacher, then it was Rory Byrne, it was Ross Brawn, it was Jean Todt. The very thing that Frederick Vasseur can't get his head around, which is, of course, to circle the wagons around his team and personnel, the racing team, from all of the politics and shenanigans that ultimately loses you time on track, is what Jean Todt made an industry note, a career out of doing. He did it brilliantly. So too, he got the right personnel in at the right place with the help of Michael Schumacher. In this legendary Driver 61 video, they talked about Schumacher going over and above the hundreds of thousands of kilometres that they got in by dint of their testing regime, building the bloody Bridgestone tyres to suit the SF2004, the god-tieriest car to have ever been created. They were legends that time. They knew exactly what needed to be done. Even then, it took them time, but there is durable competitive advantage, some say, in stability. Is there not, Stephen? It's not a bad video, mate. It's not a bad video. And again, it shows you exactly the tax that needs to be paid that Ferrari then were prepared to pay, and not necessarily, you can't necessarily say the same thing about Scuderia Ferrari in its current guise 2025 settings, but I digress. It will get techier than techie things going to the Las Vegas Grand Prix. A normal scheduling will resume for the members. Will be in the bloody voice channel on the Discord in a couple of hours from now. A couple of different hours. Apparently Cameron's still bloody sick and we need to get rest. Between now and then, normal service will resume, of course. 8 p.m. show we'll kick off as well. I need to go and get myself some water and hydrate. You guys have been legends. Between now and next time, the prosecution rests. No further questions, Your Honour.